The large council hall always felt strange to humans. Its ceiling was so high that even sound seemed to travel slowly, and the shining panels on the walls changed colors depending on the atmosphere of the room. On the day the peace meeting was scheduled, the lights stayed dim, as if the hall itself could sense the tension. Delegates from different worlds filled the seats, each representing their own people, each carrying their own worries. Everyone said they wanted peace, but their expressions told a different story. When the human envoy walked in, the room grew quieter. Even though he carried no weapon, and his steps were steady, many eyes followed him with suspicion. Some species had always admired humanity's courage and progress, but others feared that humans were growing too fast, too strong, too independent. That fear sat heavily in the air. The envoy took his seat at the long circular table. It was a simple chair, not decorated like others, but he didn't care about appearance. He only cared about the purpose of the meeting. Earth had come with the hope of fixing misunderstandings that had risen over months-strayed disagreements, border patrol mistakes, small accidents that had been magnified into huge problems. Earth believed that talking openly would show the galaxy that humans were not trying to dominate anything. They only wanted fairness. For a moment, it looked like things might go well. A few delegates nodded respectfully at the human representative. Some even offered small smiles, as if showing support quietly. But the envoy also saw a group on the far side of the hall, whispering among themselves. Their expressions were sharp, and their eyes held no warmth. They were from the faction that had always resisted Earth's growth. These species saw every human achievement as a threat, and they had been pushing for strict control over Earth for years. The meeting officially began when the council chair, a tall figure with calm, glowing features, raised a hand. The hall settled into stillness. The chair spoke in a gentle voice, welcoming everyone, repeating the purpose of the meeting, and urging all delegates to speak with patience and respect. For a while, it sounded nice, even hopeful. But the human envoy knew that polite introductions were always the easiest part. The real test would come next. When the first delegate spoke, the shift was immediate. He accused Earth of acting aggressively near shared borders. He claimed that human patrol ships had crossed restricted regions, even though the data was still unverified. Another delegate added that humanity had grown too quickly in trade and technology, upsetting the balance of the galaxy. One after another, voices rose, repeating old rumors as if they were facts. The human envoy waited, listening carefully. He didn't interrupt, didn't argue, didn't show frustration. He knew that reacting too quickly would only fuel their accusations. But inside, he felt a quiet disappointment. Earth had worked hard to be part of the council, to be respectful, to help build connections across worlds. Hearing these claims felt like watching months of effort fall apart in minutes. When it was finally his turn to speak, the envoy stood, placed his hands lightly on the table, and answered calmly. He explained what really happened at the borders, showing records of flight paths. He reminded the Council of the joint missions Earth had participated in. He spoke about the trade improvements humans brought that benefited many species, not just Earth. His words were simple and honest. He didn't raise his voice or try to sound forceful. He only wanted them to see the truth. Some delegates listened. Some even nodded in agreement. But the resistant faction remained cold. Their leader leaned forward and said humans were too unpredictable, too ambitious, and too difficult to trust. The envoy could tell that these opinions were set long before the meeting began. Still, he didn't give up. He continued speaking gently, offering real solutions. He suggested shared patrols on disputed borders, open communication channels, and joint reviews of trade regulations. He believed that cooperation was possible if everyone tried, but before he could finish, one of the opposing delegates cut him off. She said that Earth's proposals sounded like excuses, and that the Council should act firmly to protect the galaxy's long-term stability. The phrase sounded harmless, but everyone knew its real meaning. Controlling Earth. The room grew awkwardly silent. The envoy looked around, hoping someone would speak up. Some delegates avoided his eyes. Others looked anxious, unsure whose side to take. The chair shifted uncomfortably and asked the delegates to keep the discussion peaceful. But the atmosphere had already changed. The opposing factions stood together, presenting a list of rules they wanted placed on Earth. They called it a stability plan, but the envoy saw the truth immediately. It was a set of restrictions meant to limit humanity's growth, limits on travel, limits on trade, limits on scientific research, limits on almost everything that made Earth independent. For a moment, the envoy felt something tighten in his chest. He thought of the people back home who trusted him to bring back peace. He thought of the scientists, the workers, the families who depended on fair treatment. He thought of how hard Earth had worked to earn a place in the galaxy. All of that was now being challenged, not because humans had done anything wrong, but because some feared what humans might become. He tried again to speak, but the delegates from the opposing faction didn't let him finish. They kept adding new accusations, new reasons for restrictions, new claims that Earth was becoming too influential. Their words carried a sense of finality, as if they had already decided Earth's fate long before arriving at the hall dot as they talked. The human envoy noticed something else. Some delegates looked uncomfortable, but they said nothing. Others looked confused, but stayed silent. Only a few seemed willing to defend Earth, and even they appeared hesitant, afraid of creating conflict within the Council. The envoy felt a slow wave of realization. This was not a fair negotiation. This was not an honest attempt to find peace. This was a decision disguised as a discussion. For the first time, he felt tired. Not physically, but emotionally. He had prepared for debate, for a long conversation, maybe even for disagreement. But he hadn't expected the meeting to feel this one-sided. Still, he stayed patient. When the chair gave him a chance to reply again, he remained calm. He repeated Earth's desire for cooperation. He explained how these restrictions would harm not only humans, but many species who relied on Earth's help in trade, science, and exploration. He pointed out that the accusations were built on incomplete information and misunderstandings, but his words fell into the same silence. A silence that had nothing to do with listening and everything to do with avoiding responsibility. One of the opposing delegates finally spoke again, this time proposing an immediate vote on the restrictions. It was the moment the envoy had hoped would never come. A vote like that could permanently damage Earth's place in the galaxy. It could create long-term division. It could turn friends into strangers and cooperation into suspicion. When the chair announced that the vote would begin, the human envoy felt a quiet shift inside himself. Something in him hardened, not in anger, but in clarity. He understood that staying in the room now might give the Council the impression that Earth accepted the unfair treatment. So before the vote could start, he stood up. The hall grew still. Even the delegates who had been whispering stopped. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show anger. He simply said that Earth could not be part of a decision that was made without fairness, without understanding, and without genuine effort to solve problems. He said humans respected every world in the Council, but could not accept judgment born from fear instead of truth. And he said that if the Council wished to speak again, in a fair and open way, Earth would always be ready. Then he walked out of the hall. As the envoy left, a wave of whispers filled the room. Some delegates looked worried. Some looked guilty. Others looked frustrated that the situation didn't go the way they wanted. But the human envoy didn't look back. He walked calmly, with steady steps, carrying the weight of a decision he didn't want to make, but one he knew was necessary. Outside the hall, he paused for a moment, taking a slow breath. The galaxy had just changed, even if no one understood it yet. And Earth's silence, once he returned home, would speak louder than anything said in that room. The doors of the council hall closed slowly behind the human envoy, but inside, the situation only grew more complicated. As soon as he left his seat, whispering filled the chamber like a rising wind. Some members looked toward the chair, waiting for guidance, while others exchanged uneasy glances. A few even looked toward the exit, as if wondering whether they should follow the human representative or stay seated. The sudden silence from Earth created a crack in the meeting that no one knew how to mend. The chair tried to keep order by raising a hand again, but the room refused to settle. The opposing faction sensed an opening. The moment the envoy stepped out, they immediately pushed harder, arguing that the walkout proved Earth was unwilling to accept accountability. They twisted his calm decision into something else, something untrue, describing it as disrespect or refusal to cooperate. Delegates who usually stayed neutral began to shift in their seats. This was the point in the meeting where everyone would normally take a break or request more discussion. Instead, the faction pushing for restrictions moved quickly, trying to secure a vote while tensions were high. They knew emotion could sway uncertain members better than facts. One member of that faction stood up and said the walkout confirmed what they had been saying for months, that Earth believed it could ignore the Council whenever it wanted. Another claimed humanity had become too independent and needed limits for the safety of everyone. Their tone sounded calm on the surface, but underneath it, everyone could sense a strong push, almost like they were trying to take advantage of the moment. Meanwhile, a few friendly species tried to defend humanity. They argued that the envoy's exit didn't mean disrespect, but disappointment in how the discussion turned one-sided. One gentle-voiced delegate pointed out that Earth had been patient throughout the meeting and had offered solutions. She reminded everyone that walking out was not anger. It was a sign that the Council had failed to create a fair space for dialogue, that her words sounded honest. But the opposing faction immediately countered by saying it was a strategic move by Earth to gain sympathy. The accusation made several delegates frown, not because they believed it, but because they hated the idea of being forced into choosing sides. Back on the upper platform, the chair took a deep breath. It was clear that the situation had gone beyond the original purpose of the meeting. While his role was to guide discussions, he could feel control slipping from his hands. Every attempt to calm the delegates fell flat. The tension had reached a point where even a single word could spark another argument. As the debate continued, one thing became obvious. The factions were no longer discussing peace. They were arguing about control, fear, influence, and pride. The human envoy's empty chair at the round table became the center of attention. Every time someone glanced at it, the room felt heavier, like a reminder that something had broken. And everyone was pretending nothing had happened. Outside the hall, the envoy walked slowly toward the docking area, thinking about everything that had just unfolded. He didn't rush. His steps were steady, but his heart felt heavier than he expected. When he had arrived that morning, he believed the meeting could save the fragile balance between Earth and the Council. He believed that reason could win. He believed that the truth would matter. But as he walked through the quiet corridors, he realized that the meeting was not about the truth. It was about decisions already made before he stepped into the hall. It was as if the Council had simply been waiting for an excuse to pass their restrictions. All they needed was a moment of pressure, and his walkout had given them one, even if unintentionally. Still, he didn't regret leaving. In his view, staying would have meant accepting a process that wasn't fair. And if Earth accepted unfair treatment once, the Council would think they could do it again. He knew the people back home trusted him to stand firm, not only for diplomats, but for everyone whose daily life would be affected by the Council's decisions. He arrived at the docking bay, where his transport ship waited. A few assistants stood near the entrance, waiting for him, their faces filled with concern. They had heard parts of what happened through internal communication lines. They didn't ask questions, at least not yet. They simply followed him onto the ship, quietly preparing for departure. Inside the council hall, the vote was already being arranged. The chair looked troubled as he reviewed the list of proposed restrictions. Even he knew the demands were too strict, but he also understood that stopping the vote might make things worse. If he delayed it, the opposing faction would accuse him of protecting Earth. If he allowed it, it could damage the Council's unity. It was a situation with no easy way out. The vote began. Delegates raised their hands one by one. Some did it slowly, with uncertainty. Others lifted them quickly, confident in their decision. A few hesitated so long that the chair had to call their names twice. Every raised hand felt like another stone placed on the fragile bridge between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. Several delegates voted against the restrictions, but their voices were not enough. The numbers leaned heavily in favor of the faction pushing for control. The restrictions passed, even though the most knowledgeable members knew they would only create more distance, not healing. After the vote, the chair let out a quiet sigh, not of relief, but of worry. The room did not celebrate. Even those who voted for the restrictions did not cheer. It was a cold victory, and cold victories often came with long-term consequences. Meanwhile, aboard the transport ship, the human envoy sat near one of the small windows, looking out into the stars. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. What he felt was something different, a mix of sadness and understanding. He knew that Earth had tried, and he knew that trying wasn't enough for some of the species, who feared change. He also knew that the next move belonged to Earth, and whatever Earth decided would shape the galaxy's future. One of the assistants finally gathered the courage to speak. She gently asked if Earth would respond immediately. The envoy paused before answering. He said he didn't know yet, but whatever response came, it needed to be thoughtful, steady, and calm. Reacting in frustration would only prove the Council's fears right. Earth had to show a different kind of strength, the strength to remain balanced even when treated unfairly. The ship prepared for departure, and as it lifted off the Council platform, the envoy closed his eyes for a moment. He imagined the people back home, the scientists working late in labs, the families sitting together during evening meals, the workers repairing ships, the students rushing to classes. None of them knew yet that decisions had been made today which would affect their future. He promised himself he would not let fear or pressure decide Earth's next steps. The galaxy might misunderstand humans, but Earth had always stood firm through confusion and challenged Dot as the ship left the Council's orbit. The envoy felt a quiet clarity forming. The peace talks had collapsed, yes, but perhaps something new could rise from this. Something that didn't rely on approval from those who never wanted fairness. Back inside the hall, delegates slowly began to leave. Some walked out in silence, thoughtful and unsure. Others gathered in small groups to discuss what had happened, whispering about what it would mean for trade, travel, and future cooperation. A few approached the chair, asking whether another meeting should be scheduled. The chair simply said they would wait for Earth's response. But deep down, he wondered if Earth would respond at all. When the envoy ship entered hyperspace, a sense of stillness filled the cabin. The assistants talked quietly among themselves, avoiding heavy topics. They didn't want to disturb the envoy, who sat alone, looking at the stars fading into blue streaks outside the window. He thought back to the moment he stood up in the hall. The silence, the surprise, and the unspoken question in everyone's eyes. He knew that walkout would become a symbol of something much bigger. Perhaps strength. Perhaps frustration. perhaps freedom. Whatever it meant, the galaxy would talk about that moment for a long time. And Earth's reply, whenever it came, would shape the story even more. When the envoy ship finally returned to Earth, the planet looked calm from above. Cities glowed softly on the surface. Oceans shimmered in the sunlight, and nothing looked unusual from space. But he knew that people were already waiting to hear what happened at the council. News traveled fast across the galaxy. Messages, rumors, and half-true stories were already spreading between planets, and Earth had to prepare for the questions that would follow. The envoy stepped out of the ship quietly. A small team greeted him, guiding him through a private passage toward the meeting center. They didn't ask him anything during the walk, but their eyes said enough. They had already heard that he left the council hall during the discussion. They didn't know why, but they trusted that he had a reason. Still, their silence carried the weight of uncertainty. Inside the meeting room, Earth's leadership was already gathered. They sat around a wide table, screens glowing softly in front of them. Everyone stood when the envoy entered, not out of formality, but out of respect. They knew how difficult his task had been. He sat down slowly, placed a small recorded device on the table, and started to explain every accusation, every attempt to clarify the truth, every time the opposing faction ignored the facts. And the moment he realized the meeting was no longer fair, he told them how the vote was pushed forward, how the restrictions were designed, and how the hall reacted when he walked out. The room stayed quiet throughout. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody tried to advise him too soon. They listened, letting every detail settle in their minds. Some leaned back in their chairs, others folded their hands, but all of them understood that something had shifted in the galaxy. When he finished speaking, there was a long silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, but the kind that comes when people realize they are standing at the start of a major decision. One of the senior advisors finally spoke. He said Earth needed to respond carefully, but firmly. Another advisor wondered if they should reach out to friendly species first. A third advisor suggested releasing a public message to Earth citizens to prevent panic. Everyone had ideas, but nobody wanted to rush. The envoy listened quietly, knowing that Earth was entering a moment shaped by patience, not speed. After a few minutes, the room agreed on one thing. Earth would not respond immediately. They all felt the same. Intuition. Sometimes silence says more than words. Sometimes not reacting is the strongest reaction. And in this situation, silence would send a message. Earth was not desperate, not afraid, and not shaken. The meeting ended with a plan. For now, they would observe. They would wait. They would let the galaxy wonder what Earth was thinking. They would use this time to decide what message would truly represent the spirit of the planet. The envoy walked out of the room, feeling heavier but clearer. His work wasn't finished. It had only reached a new stage. He left the building quietly, avoiding reporters waiting nearby. Reporters called out questions, some polite, some dramatic, but he simply nodded and walked past them without saying a single word. And that silence became the first spark. Across the city, people gathered in small groups, checking live updates and sharing theories. Some thought Earth would send a strong reply within minutes. Others believed a diplomatic message was already being prepared behind closed doors. A few feared that the Council's restrictions would harm daily life. But as time passed, Earth remained silent. Hours went by. The sun slowly moved across the sky as city lights faded in, and still not a single official statement came. The galaxy noticed. On council-aligned planets, citizens gathered around public screens. News networks replayed the moment the envoy walked out, looping it over and over, while analysts discussed the meaning behind it. They debated whether the silence meant caution, anger, strategy, or surprise. Some networks invited experts who claimed Earth was probably preparing a strong protest. Others believed humanity would eventually apologize. But Earth stayed silent, even species who supported. Earth grew anxious. They sent private messages to Earth's offices, asking if everything was all right, offering support, or expressing concern. They didn't receive answers, either not out of disrespect, but because Earth needed time to think deeply. Inside Earth's main communication center, a small group of officials monitored every message the planet received. Screens filled with notifications, glowing with symbols from dozens of alien languages. The officials watched everything carefully, but didn't respond to anything yet. Meanwhile, the envoy returned to his home apartment. The building was quiet, and the hallways smelled of warm air and freshly cleaned floors. He didn't turn on the lights when he entered. He walked to the balcony, opened the glass door, and looked out at the city. From high above, the city looked peaceful. Cars moved slowly along bright roads. People walked along sidewalks, some laughing, some messaging friends, some carrying groceries. None of them could see the stars clearly from the bright lights below, but they didn't need to. The envoy knew the stars were watching them. He sat down on a small chair, feeling the quiet breeze brush against his face. He had never felt so much responsibility before. He thought about the pressure Earth faced, the restrictions, the accusations, the unfair vote. He wondered what message Earth should send back. A strong reply? A peaceful one? A warning? Or something entirely different? But the more he thought, the more he realized the truth. The right response would come naturally, not forcefully. Deep inside, he believed that Earth's greatest strength wasn't power or technology. It was calmness. Humanity had survived challenges not by reacting loudly, but by thinking, learning, and growing quietly. The galaxy often misunderstood that calmness. But it was part of who humans were. As night grew darker, he finally closed his eyes and rested. But across the galaxy, the silence grew louder. In distant star systems, leaders held emergency meetings. They wondered if Earth's silence meant preparation for withdrawal. Some feared losing human trade. Others feared losing human scientific partnerships. A few feared Earth becoming distant, because even if humans disagreed with the Council, their presence brought stability. Council members felt anxious too. They had expected Earth to protest, argue, or demand renegotiations. They didn't expect nothing. Silence wasn't something they could debate. Silence wasn't something they could defend. Silence wasn't something they could twist into a story. Silence made them uncomfortable. Back on Earth, the leadership team met again several hours later. The envoy joined them, sitting quietly at the table. The mood in the room felt different this time. No one looked stressed. Instead, everyone looked thoughtful. They discussed the silence, not as a delay, but as a message in itself. They talked about how the galaxy reacted, what people were saying, and how even the Council seemed unsure of what to do next. The envoy spoke softly, saying that Earth didn't need to rush. That silence itself was showing who they were: calm, patient, steady, and unwilling to be pushed around. Everyone nodded. The decision became clear. Earth would continue observing. The reply would come, yes, but not yet. First, they would let the galaxy feel the weight of Earth's absence from the conversation. Hours turned into half a day. Half a day became a full day. By then, the galaxy was restless. News channels kept asking, "What is Earth planning?" Government leaders exchanged worried messages. Even the council chair requested a meeting, hoping to reopen communication, but Earth didn't answer. The envoy watched all of this quietly. He understood what was happening. The silence wasn't creating fear. It was creating uncertainty. And uncertainty often reveals the truth about people. Earth's silence showed which species cared about fairness. It showed who valued cooperation. It exposed who wanted control. It revealed who was nervous without Earth's presence. It became the mirror the galaxy never expected. Later that evening, as the envoy walked through a quiet garden near the government center, he realized something important. Earth wasn't just silent. Earth was thinking. Earth was choosing. And the reply they would eventually send would shape the next chapter of the galaxy. For now, silence was not weakness. It was preparation. Earth's silence had lasted longer than anyone expected. By the fourth day, the entire planet moved with a strange mixture of calmness and curiosity. People still went to work. Families still gathered for meals. Students still hurried to classes. But conversations always drifted back to the same topic. What would Earth say, and when? Some people thought silence was the smartest thing Earth could do. Others felt anxious, believing the Council's restrictions could affect trade and travel. But no matter what anyone felt, one truth connected everyone: the reply would matter, not just for Earth, but for the whole galaxy. Inside Earth's main decision center, the envoy spent most of his time studying messages from different worlds. Some messages were polite, asking for clarity. Some tried to sound gentle, but carried hints of fear. Others, especially from the opposing faction, were impatient and demanding. They insisted Earth explain why it walked out. They insisted Earth show respect by responding. They insisted Earth comply with the new restrictions. But Earth said nothing. The envoy read each message quietly. He did not react with emotion. He simply observed the pattern forming. The more Earth stayed silent, the more the galaxy revealed its true colors. Some species became gentler, sending warm invitations. They said they hoped Earth was all right and wanted to keep friendship strong. Others became impatient and uneasy, as if silence meant Earth was preparing something unpredictable. A few others became defensive, loudly repeating that the Council's vote was fair. Even though everyone knew it, WASN The leadership team met again that morning. The room felt peaceful, not rushed. A wide window filled one side, letting sunlight wash across the table. The envoy sat with the advisors, each person holding a cup of warm tea or coffee. The mood felt more like a thoughtful family discussion than a government crisis. One advisor said Earth's silence had already changed the situation. Another said the galaxy was now questioning whether the restrictions were too strict. A third added that several friendly planets were privately expressing discomfort with the vote. The envoy listened to all of them. He could feel the weight of the moment, but he didn't feel overwhelmed anymore. He simply felt ready. The leadership agreed to wait a little longer, not because they were unsure, but because timing mattered. A reply delivered too early would seem emotional. A reply delivered too late would look careless. They needed the moment when the galaxy was listening most carefully. Outside, the global communication screens showed calm broadcasts, not dramatic ones. People discussed gardening, science discoveries, new music releases, and also, occasionally, the Council situation. But nobody panicked. Earth's people trusted their leaders. They trusted the envoy. They believed Earth would answer in a way that stayed true to human values. The envoy decided to take a walk in the afternoon. He wore simple clothes and walked through the busy streets like any other person. Some recognized him, but nobody crowded him. People smiled lightly or nodded respectfully, but they didn't stop him. They understood he needed space to think. He walked along a path lined with trees, where sunlight filtered through the leaves. The warm air carried the smell of food from a nearby market. Children played in the open field, running in circles and laughing without any worry about interstellar politics. People sat on benches talking softly, enjoying their day. He realized something important as he watched them. This was what Earth was protecting. Not power, not reputation life. Ordinary, peaceful life. Humans didn't want control over the galaxy. They only wanted to live honestly, safely, and with dignity. And that clarity gave him strength. Later in the day, news from the council reached Earth. The council chair had requested another internal meeting. Many delegates had raised concerns that Earth's silence was creating instability. Some asked if the vote should be reviewed. Others insisted the decision was final. It was clear that the council had begun to divide internally. The opposing faction tried to maintain control. They argued loudly that the restrictions had to be enforced immediately. Their tone changed from confidence to frustration. Their messages sounded less like authority and more like fear that their decision was slipping away. The envoy watched all of this with quiet understanding. He could almost feel the galaxy leaning forward, waiting for Earth's next breath. That evening, the leadership team gathered again. The room was darker now, lit only by soft yellow lights. The atmosphere felt very different from the morning, more focused, more serious, more ready. An advisor suggested sending a message that clarified the walkout calmly. Another thought they should question the fairness of the restrictions. Someone else proposed asking for a second meeting with neutral mediation. The envoy listened, but something in him felt unsettled. None of those ideas felt right, not for Earth, not for this moment. He stood up slowly and walked toward the window. The night sky was filled with stars, glowing sharply against the darkness. Looking at them, he finally understood what Earth's reply should be. He spoke softly, but the room fell silent. He said Earth shouldn't argue. Earth shouldn't complain. Earth shouldn't justify itself. He said the galaxy had already talked enough. They had discussed Earth, judged Earth, restricted Earth, doubted Earth, without listening to Earth. He said the reply should be simple, peaceful, and honest. Something that reflected human nature, not anger, not fear, not loudness. Something that reminded the galaxy who humans truly were. The room stayed silent. Hanging on his words, he said Earth should express disappointment, yes, but calmly. Earth should say it still wished for cooperation, yes, but only if treated fairly. Earth should say respected the council, but could not accept decisions made without understanding. Earth should say it would not withdraw from the galaxy, but would step back from council activities until trust could be restored. In other words, Earth would remain present, but not control. The advisors exchanged thoughtful looks. One nodded slowly. Another leaned forward, agreeing softly. It wasn't a dramatic reply, but it was strong in a different way. It showed maturity. It showed clarity. It showed self-respect. It wasn't a threat. It was a boundary. The leadership approved the idea. The envoy began drafting the reply late that night. He wrote in simple, warm, steady language. No anger, no accusation. Only truth. He explained Earth's disappointment. He explained the unfairness. He explained the walkout. He explained Earth's hope for better peace talks in the future. He emphasized respect, not weakness. He emphasized calmness, not fear. He emphasized dignity, not pride. When he finished writing, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled softly. The message felt right. It felt human. But before sending it, he paused. He knew once Earth broke the silence, the galaxy would react instantly. He knew the council would feel the impact. He knew some would agree, some would criticize, and some would panic. But he also knew something else. This message would represent Earth's values, not Earth's anger. The leadership team gathered around him, reading the message carefully. They nodded slowly, each recognizing the strength hidden in its softness. They agreed that the message would be sent soon, but not tonight. They wanted one more sunrise, one more cycle of calm, one more moment to let Earth breathe before the galaxy changed again. The envoy left the building after midnight. The streets were quiet, the air cool and fresh. He looked up at the stars once more. They shimmered like scattered lanterns across the sky. Silent and patient, he smiled faintly. Tomorrow, Earth would speak, and the galaxy would listen. When Earth finally sent its reply to the Galactic Council, the message was short, calm, and almost emotionless. No threats. No warnings, no anger. Just a simple statement that humanity was withdrawing from every agreement, every project, and every shared network connected to the Council. The message ended with a single line saying Earth wished the galaxy a stable future. That one line created a storm across hundreds of star systems. Inside the Council building, the representatives stared at their screens for several seconds, unsure how to react. Many had expected Earth to protest loudly, send sharp words, or at least demand another meeting. But this quiet exit made everyone uneasy. It was like someone closing a door softly, yet the sound of that door echoed far louder than a slam. At first, some council members tried to laugh it off. They said humans were being dramatic, that Earth would come back once they realized how difficult it was to live outside the council system. They said no species could function independently in a galaxy as interconnected as theirs. But even as they spoke, their confidence felt empty, because deep inside, they knew the truth. Humans were not as dependent on the Council as the Council was on humans' DAC reports began coming in within hours. Several planets that used Earth-made communication networks noticed sudden delays. Trade routes that relied on human navigation systems lost access to real-time maps. Research stations that used Earth-created defense tech found their shields working slower than usual. In a universe where technology connected everyone, even the smallest disruption felt like a sudden blackout. Within a day, panic started brewing. Messages poured toward the Council chamber, questions, complaints, and demands from worried planets. Some representatives tried to calm their people, saying it was only a temporary issue, that the Council would solve everything. But these promises were made without any real plan. Many members secretly wondered the same question. What if humanity had already prepared for this moment, long before the peace talks collapsed? On Earth, things were calmer. The leaders didn't hold any loud press conferences or make dramatic speeches. Instead, they followed their usual schedules, met behind closed doors, and let the rest of the galaxy react how it wanted. Their silence after the message made everything even more unsettling for the Council. The galaxy had always seen humans as emotional, expressive, and sometimes unpredictable. But this quiet confidence was something new. It felt like Earth had already stepped into another chapter while the rest of the galaxy was still stuck on the previous page. Several planets outside the Council began to sense what was happening. These independent worlds had always admired humanity for its creativity and resilience. Now, they saw Earth walking away from the Council without hesitation. For them, this was a sign of strength. One by one, they sent private messages to Earth, offering partnership, trade, and cultural exchange. Humanity replied, but the responses were short and formal. They made it clear Earth was open to peaceful relations, but it would not join any new alliances or allow anyone to influence its decisions. The messages had no anger, no fear, just steady purpose. And that calm tone made those worlds trust Earth even more. Back in the Council, many representatives felt worried, not because Earth was leaving, but because some planets were now drifting closer to humanity rather than the Council. If too many species started following Earth's example, the Council's authority would weaken. And everyone knew the Council had already been struggling with unity for years. Some members blamed the humans. Others blamed each other. Some blamed the peace talks that had turned into arguments and accusations. But the people outside, the citizens, living on distant planets, didn't care about the Council's internal politics. They only cared that their networks were failing, their research was slowing down, and their trade routes were becoming unstable. The Council called an emergency session to discuss the crisis. The room was noisy, full of frustration and fear. Everyone spoke at once. They said Earth's withdrawal was reckless. They said humanity had endangered the galaxy. They demanded action, even though they didn't know what kind of action they wanted. But underneath all the noise, something else was clear. They were not angry because Earth left. They were angry because Earth didn't need them. One representative finally stood up and reminded the others that the Council had pushed Earth into a corner during the peace talks. They had ignored the human envoy's attempts to explain. They had allowed their biases to guide their decisions. Now, they were dealing with the consequences. But instead of listening, members argued even more. Some demanded the Council punish Earth. Others argued that punishment was impossible, because Earth wasn't breaking any rule by leaving. A few suggested sending diplomats, but most new humans would not return. Outside the Council, the galaxy was forming its own opinions. News channels across many star systems started discussing humanity's message. Experts debated whether humans had planned this for years, or if it was a decision made in frustration. Citizens commented online, saying they admired Earth's courage, or feared what would happen next. Some joked that humanity had simply logged out of the galaxy. Others felt uneasy, like something big was shifting in the background, not in many places. People realized something surprising. Humanity had not acted out of anger or pride. They had acted out of exhaustion. They were tired of repeating themselves, tired of defending their identity, tired of being misjudged at every meeting. Their quiet exit was not an attack, it was a statement. Meanwhile, inside Earth's borders, life continued. People worked, studied, traveled, and dreamed of their future. They did not talk about war or revenge. They talked about building new systems that were independent and safe. They talked about improving their own technology so they would never again rely on a council that did not respect them. Earth's leaders met daily. They discussed ways to support their citizens through the transition. They strengthened their relationships with friendly planets outside the council. They made sure that the withdrawal did not harm everyday life. And most importantly, they reminded everyone that Earth's goal was peace, not conflict. But the Council did not see this side of humanity. They only saw the silence. And the more silent Earth remained, the louder the galaxy's fear grew. In the days that followed, several Council-controlled projects started to fail. Without Earth's participation, efficiency dropped. Transport ships got delayed. Shared research databases became slower. A few systems even crashed because they relied too heavily on human programming. Finally, a group of Council members decided to reach out privately, hoping Earth would respond differently to individual planets rather than the entire Council. Each message tried a different tone. Some were polite, some were desperate, and a few carried a hint of frustration. But Earth answered all of them in the same steady manner. We appreciate your message. At this moment, we are focusing on internal development. We remain peaceful and wish stability for all. That sentence became famous across the galaxy. It was simple, polite, and yet impossible to argue with. It gave no room for negotiation, no chance to pull Earth back, no sign of weakness. It was a type of confidence most species had never witnessed before. Some younger planets admired humanity more deeply now. They saw Earth as a species that didn't need to shout to show strength. A species that didn't need to threaten to make a point. A species that could walk away not because it was defeated, but because it chose growth over conflict. The Council, however, saw the situation differently. They felt their influence slipping. Their meetings grew shorter and more tense. Some members left early, frustrated. Others whispered that maybe the Council needed to change before more planets left. But changing an old system was difficult. And admitting mistakes was even harder. As more days passed, the galaxy slowly realized something important. Humanity had not shocked the galaxy through force. They had not created fear by threatening anyone. Instead, they had done something far more surprising. They had shown the galaxy what it looked like to stay calm when everyone else panicked. Earth had walked away, and the sound of that quiet step was still echoing across star systems that had never imagined a future where the Council wasn't at the center dot, and this was only the beginning of that echo. In the weeks after Earth sent its quiet message, the galaxy slowly entered a new phase. No one had planned it, and no one fully understood it, but everyone could feel that things were changing. It wasn't a loud shift, not an explosive event or a dramatic declaration. It was something softer, like the moment after a storm, when the clouds are still dark, but the air feels different. People didn't know whether this new feeling meant hope or danger. At first, many planets refused to accept that Earth was truly gone. They kept expecting another message, maybe something that explained everything more clearly. They thought maybe humans would return to the Council once emotions settled or misunderstandings cleared. But Earth didn't send anything. The silence that followed their short message stayed as calm as before. Meanwhile, life on Earth continued in a focused and steady way. The leaders had already decided long before the Council meeting that if things ever reached a breaking point, they would move forward independently. So now, they simply put that plan into motion. Scientists, engineers, diplomats, and everyday citizens each played their part. It wasn't easy, but they were determined not to let uncertainty slow them down. They upgraded their communication networks, making them stronger than before. They built new transport routes with planets willing to cooperate outside the Council's influence. They repaired systems that once depended on shared technology and replaced them with local alternatives. Everything was done quietly, without fanfare. Their goal wasn't to prove anything to the galaxy. It was to build a stable future for their own people. As Earth grew more stable, the Council grew more unstable. At meetings, representatives argued more openly. Some said the Council should apologize to Earth, hoping humans would reconsider. Others insisted Earth had acted selfishly, even though, deep inside, they knew the Council had pushed humanity too far during the peace talks. But admitting that was difficult. Too many egos were involved, too many years of old habits and old ways of thinking. The Council tried to keep its image strong, but cracks were forming. Several projects that relied heavily on human tech struggled to function. Ships moved slower. Research centers fell behind. Trade routes lost efficiency. Little by little, the galaxy started noticing that much of what the Council had taken for granted was actually held together by human contributions. And that realization scared many planets. One thing that surprised everyone was how calm Earth remained through all of this. There were no speeches about revenge, no claims about being treated unfairly. Humans simply carried on with their work, focusing on improving their society and supporting the planets that approached them in peace. Because of this quiet stability, some independent worlds began looking to Earth as a role model. They admired how humanity didn't try to dominate the galaxy or force anyone to choose sides. They liked how Earth stood firm without shouting, how it walked away without slamming the door. These planets had always felt overlooked by the Council, so they found comfort in Earth's calm independence. One by one, they began forming informal connections with Earth's small trade deals, research exchanges, cultural gatherings. Nothing official, nothing that looked like an alliance. Just friendly cooperation between planets that respected each other. And Earth welcomed this with the same steady tone it had shown since the beginning. Elsewhere in the galaxy, everyday people also talked about what had happened. On some planets, people questioned whether the Council was still capable of leading responsibly. They wondered if their representatives had acted out of pride instead of wisdom during the peace talks. Some citizens even suggested that their worlds should learn from Earth's independence and become less dependent on the Council. This made many leaders nervous. They knew that if too many species started thinking this way, the Council's influence could slowly fade. It wouldn't collapse suddenly. It would simply lose relevance, the same way old traditions sometimes disappear when people stop believing in them. Inside the Council building, the mood shifted drastically. Meetings became longer, but less productive. Members spent more time arguing than solving problems. Some suggested reaching out to Earth officially with an apology, while others warned that such an act would make the Council look weak. A few argued that the galaxy needed a fresh start, one where every species had equal voice. But their words were drowned in disagreements. And while they argued, Earth kept building. People on Earth weren't celebrating. They weren't proud or angry. They were simply focused. They understood that independence came with responsibilities, and they wanted to prove to themselves, not to others, that they could handle it. Factories worked to produce their own versions of systems they once shared with the Council. Schools updated their curriculum to prepare the next generation for a wider universe without relying on the Council's structure. Scientists tested new shielding technologies, faster communication lines, and more efficient engines. As these updates began, something interesting happened. Earth started advancing faster than before. Without the Council's slow approval processes, humanity could innovate freely. There were no committees delaying projects, no political debates stopping research. Decisions were made quickly. Ideas moved forward with fewer restrictions. And because of that, progress came faster than the galaxy expected. News of Earth's advancements spread quietly through trade routes. Pilots, merchants, travelers each carried little pieces of information. None of it was dramatic, but when these pieces reached distant planets, they painted a clear picture. Earth was no longer struggling. It was growing. The Council noticed this too, though unwillingly. Each report about Earth's progress felt like a reminder of what they had lost. Some members still believed they could repair the relationship. Others had already accepted that Earth would never return. But no one could deny the truth. The galaxy was entering a new era, one shaped not by conflict or power, but by a calm yet firm decision made by one world. Even the younger representatives, those who had joined the Council recently, found themselves questioning old traditions. They wondered if the Council's structure was outdated. Many felt frustrated that the peace talks had turned into a fight, instead of a genuine attempt to understand humanity's perspective. These younger voices grew louder over time, demanding change, transparency, and fairness. They knew that if the Council continued the same way, more planets might follow Earth's example. Outside official buildings, ordinary citizens across the galaxy found themselves adjusting to new realities. Some planets set up their own systems to replace the gaps left by Earth. Others tried improving their technologies so they wouldn't depend too much on outsiders. A few worlds even asked Earth if they could purchase human-made systems directly, bypassing the Council entirely. Earth accepted some of these requests carefully, making sure not to damage the stability of small planets. Their goal wasn't dominance. It was cooperation based on mutual respect. And people noticed that difference, even in casual conversations. People said Earth had handled the situation with surprising maturity. They admired that humans didn't try to expose anyone or seek sympathy. They simply chose their path and walked it with confidence. As more weeks passed, the galaxy slowly adapted. Some systems still struggled without Earth's participation, but new solutions were being developed. A handful of Council members reached out privately to Earth again, not to demand or negotiate, but to ask for guidance. And this time, Earth offered practical advice without expecting anything in return. Those small acts softened the atmosphere. They didn't fix everything, but they helped reduce tension. By the end of those weeks, the galaxy realized something powerful. Earth's reply had shocked everyone, not because it was aggressive, but because it was peaceful. It didn't use anger to make its point. It used calm certainty. It demonstrated that strength doesn't always require force. Sometimes, the strongest step a world can take is simply walking toward its own future with quiet confidence. And in the end, that quiet step changed how the galaxy viewed Earth forever. Humans had not tried to control the galaxy. They had not tried to frighten anyone. They had not tried to claim power. They had done something far more surprising. They had chosen dignity over conflict, focus over chaos, growth over approval. And because of that choice, the galaxy realized that a new era had begun, not one defined by the Council or by old structures, but an era where each planet could choose its own path, just like Earth did.